The defense continues at federal court in Newark, that one day after the judge refused to toss out the case against Senator Bob Menendez, the Democrat from New Jersey. Our Dominic Carter, as always, he was at the courthouse today, and he joins us with the very latest.
And good evening to you, Richard. The key element of the defense today for Senator Menendez is to reinforce that he and Dr. Melgen were such good friends that they did not think of nor need to engage in bribery. The senator is declaring it's time for his side of the story. How would you assess your day today? How do you feel, Senator?
You know, we keep putting our case forward and the real truth of what happened, and so we're feeling good.
The wife of Dr. Melgen, Flor Melgen, who was from the Dominican Republic, was back on the witness stand through an interpreter, describing the close relationship between her husband and Senator Menendez. When she was done, she walked over to the daughter and son of Menendez, sitting with them, and Menendez himself gave her a warm embrace. Flor Melgen was asked about an unexpected overnight guest at her home in 2010. Then Florida Governor Charlie Crist. But the next day, Crist, an independent at the time, running for the U.S. Senate, left a $100 check to cover his stay. Under cross-examination, this was the exchange with the prosecutor to Melgen's wife. Quote, "This is a check from Charlie Crist to your husband." "Yes," Flor Melgen said. The prosecutor's response, "So at least this politician knows how to pay you back for things." Defense attorneys immediately objected, leading Judge Walls to instruct the jury to disregard the prosecutor's last question. In an attempt that Menendez had nothing to hide about his friendship with Melgen, defense attorneys also point to the senator's 2009 book, Growing American Roots, where he states, quote, "It would be hard not to mention a friend of mine, Dr. Solomon Melgen, a prominent, well-respected, enterprising ophthalmologist based in South Florida." Menendez in the book goes on. The obstacles were many. Among other things, he hadn't learned English yet, and he faced prejudice from people who said he would never make the cut. Democrats continue to rally around Menendez here today. Newark Mayor Ras Baraka and Newark Councilman Anibal Ramos.
Well, I believe in Senator Menendez. He's got an incredible career as an elected official, you know, from school board member to mayor, congressman, a U.S. senator, and, you know, I trust in his judgment.
Also, Richard, on the stand today, one of the lawyers that represented Dr. Melgen during that $8.9 million Medicare dispute. Richard, defense counsel announced today in the courtroom that they plan to wrap up their case around Halloween. Reporting from the federal courthouse in Newark, I'm Dominic Carter. Richard, let's go back to you in the studio.
Well, New Jersey has its share of corrupt politicians, but New York, some would say, even leads the pack. PolitiFact says the Empire State has more corrupt officials than any other state. Now, that includes the men on your screen who we've covered over the years here, from Malcolm Smith, Pedro Espada, John Sampson, and the list goes on and on. You know the drill. Well, my next guest supports a ballot measure that would allow judges to reduce or even revoke pensions altogether of politicians convicted of felonies related to their official duties. Todd Kaminsky, Democratic State Senator representing part of Nassau County out on Long Island. Senator, thank you as always. Okay, before we get to the initiative that's going to be before voters come November, explain where we are now. And you come at this from a unique background. Before you went up to Albany, you were a prosecutor yourself, former assistant U.S. attorney. You helped with secure convictions of the aforementioned Pedro Espada and other elected officials that were convicted of corruption, among other things. You were surprised as to how are these guys keeping their pensions after obviously an abuse of trust?
Sure. One of the things that we did in the Espada trial after the conviction was work with the civil team at the U.S. Attorney's Office to secure his pension, to pay back the taxes he owed and some of the other restitution. I think people believe out there that there are like two systems. There's systems for regular people, and then there are the politicians who get to do things that other people can't do. If you have a job and you abuse your trust in that job, let's say steal from your company or do something horrible, there's no way that company's paying your pension. And so when people look at elected officials collecting pensions from jobs that the people put there to occupy on their behalf, that they then abused, to get a pension out of that really sticks in people's craw, and people think it's totally unjust, and that's led to the push for this constitutional reform that voters are going to be asked to vote on November 7th.
And I want to talk about that in a second, but some people say, hey, wait a second, Senator, didn't we do something like this back in 2011, the Public Integrity Act or whatever? Didn't it stop these guys from getting pensions? The answer is not so much, right?
Yeah, there were a lot of people that were grandfathered in, but this is before I ever got up to Albany. They were basically said if you came in after this date, it doesn't count for you. So when we talk about people like Skelos and Silver and different names like that, had their conviction stuck or eventually will stick, it didn't apply to them. What this says, what this constitutional measure will say if voters approve it on the back of their ballots on November 7th is, if you commit a crime after this date, you're subject to pension forfeiture, period, full stop.
Now, you mentioned the back of the ballot, and that's been one of the items here. I've looked at every piece of polling, whether it's more than 3/4, 90%, overwhelmingly people say, you got a good idea, Senator, and you and other supporters of this, you're on to something. But they got to look for this thing. It's not right there as to, pick your next county executive or whatever else. You got to actually do some work here. Why was it made this difficult?
It's a good question. Traditionally, that's where ballot measures go, and I think this is a lot about letting the public know this is something that they should care about. Certainly, there's been a big push with the Constitutional Convention issue, especially with opponents of that, to get people to know, hey, you got to turn this over and you got to vote against it. I think as long as people see this measure there, it is overwhelmingly popular. Nobody wants corrupt officials to get away with public money to help live out a nice lifestyle the rest of their lives. I think it'll pass as long as people see it, and that's part of hopefully what we're doing here today is letting voters know about it.
Okay, you mentioned Silver and Skelos, and obviously a lot of this had to do with the McDonald case down in Virginia, the former governor convicted, but upon re-examination by the U.S. Supreme Court, there was a redefinition of what corruption was with quid pro quos, and his conviction was overturned. To that end, and I'm surrounded by attorneys on a regular basis, I'm not being a wise guy. Can you define corruption anymore? Because I look at what Silver and Skelos did, and forget the jury instruction and all the rest. What is the quid? What is the quo? And do you have to be a sibling idiot anymore to be convicted of corruption the way the new laws are? I really don't understand this.
Yeah, look, I think what the Supreme Court has done is thrown it on our laps for Congress, but specifically to me as the state government, to step up. They didn't say the Constitution doesn't allow this. What they've said is the federal statutes that federal prosecutors, like I used to do, use, aren't meant to go this wide. They're only meant for this. You may not agree with that interpretation, but that's where we are. So Congress could either say, no, 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 it should include all of this, or we in New York could do that. Right now, if you talk to a local DA, they will tell you that the bribery laws in New York are impossible. You basically have to have someone say, I'm going to bribe you, right, and then someone else say, I would like to be bribed. That is not going to happen. So we can make our bribery laws a lot easier, and they don't always have to be a quid pro quo. If somebody wants to give a politician a gift and another gift and another gift, it's not because they happen to think they look nice. It's because they want to influence them. That should be a serious crime. It's not now in New York.
How much is there an appetite, though, Senator? I know, and I'm not blowing sunshine. You've been a strong advocate. We've had other folks here who are clear on this without equivocations. But Governor Cuomo, at one point he was after you guys, after the rash of charges against folks in the Assembly and the Senate to get after it. All of a sudden, some would say it hits a little closer to home to the executive branch, and then he says publicly there's no appetite in Albany for real reform here. Which one is it, and is there enough appetite at all levels of the legislative branch here to actually get something done?
Look, I think the governor, like a lot of people, want to have partners that care about this. And I frankly think that every voter should be looking to their official locally and in Albany and otherwise to say, what are you doing about corruption? I think right now we have a state Senate that's frankly been way too slow. I'm here today to talk about pension forfeiture, which is smart. The right thing to do is smart and fair to take away corrupt politicians' pensions.
And that's great, but that's the punishment side. I'm talking about the front end. Why should it be this complicated for us to know when somebody's abusing their office? It seems pretty clear to me, but everybody else says, oh no, there's shades of gray here. Well, does it have to be that way?
No, it doesn't. And when people speak up, it's powerful. Let's remember we had speed cameras where I am in Nassau County. Think about all the time it took to put them up, to hook them up, to find the locations, and then one day they were gone. Because when people speak their minds, politicians listen. People need to be vocal about corruption. And I think, frankly, the fact that you have the powers that be, whether it's the Republican majority in the Senate, who have been dragging their feet on corruption, we got to make it an issue for everybody. And I do think that if the people want to create the appetite, there will be one there. I'm certainly ready to get to work. A lot of other people are, frankly, on both sides of the aisle, depending on where you are. But not everybody is. A lot of people like the old boys network, the old system, and that's got to go.
Makes sense to me. And again, we can start here at least by stiffening the penalties, and that's what exactly would be on the ballot this November here as it relates to taking away the pensions for a politician convicted of a felony, and we wish the Senator the best luck on that. All right, coming up next, NFL owners, they're meeting as we speak, and all those anthem protests, they're on the agenda now. The man who started it all, Colin Kaepernick, has filed a grievance saying that owner collusion has kept him out of the league. We'll talk about all of that and more.